Hey, welcome back to the Conscious Environment Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am really excited for this week, guys, because we finally get to dive into DEI work. Like, what does diversity, equity, and inclusion means? And I got a chance to sit down with Rahmeh. She is an amazing DEI expert. She's a Muslim woman, and she specializes in religious diversity, equity, and inclusion. But she knows a lot about a lot, so we had an amazing conversation that talked about the whole kind of spectrum of what is included in DEI work for your company, your school, yourself, whatever. So I hope you guys enjoy the conversation.
What's your name? What do you do? And where can people find you?
So, hello everyone listening. My name is Rahmeh Ramezany. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a diversity, equity, inclusion, and intercultural practitioner, which I just use the word practitioner to do like all the things. Speaker, trainer is mostly what I do is trainings, consulting, subject matter expertise if you're making curriculum or content and stuff like that, all the things. Mm-hmm. And so within diversity, equity, and inclusion work, I specialize in religious identity and, of course, especially Muslim, being Muslim as I am Muslim. I'm born and raised in, a Muslim family. And so in the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I know we'll get into like generally more what that is as we go along, but just in general, like the foundations of that field are really in race and racism and gender and sexism and addressing those like discrimination cases. And that is absolutely good, positive. We need that work. And also there are so many other identity groups that also have unique but similar like challenges. Like we're all under capitalism and white supremacy, and like it hates everyone who isn't like a straight white man, and like forces us all to assimilate as much as possible, and it punishes us for how much we are not able to do so. However, like people who are disabled, people who are from religious marginalized communities in the West, I say that because obviously if I were in a Muslim country, which there are a number of Muslim countries, that would be a completely different context, right? I'm born and raised in the United States. I'm American. So that is my context. That's where I do the work. I get a lot of people, Ryan, like who are like, well, what about this Arab country? Well, what about this Muslim country? I'm like, I'm not from that Muslim country. I've never been to that Muslim country. Like, what are you even saying? Like, I probably agree with you, honestly. Anyway, so yeah, bringing considerations of religion into diversity, equity, and inclusion work.
Perfect. And where can people find you at? Because I know we talked about LinkedIn and your name is your name there, but other socials or anything like that?
Yeah, so I am active on, LinkedIn for sure. That's my longest standing platform, but then I'm also on obviously TikTok, I'm on Instagram, and I'm on YouTube. God willing, in time, I want to do more and more with YouTube. That would be really fun, but it just takes so much like production to put together like a standalone video. But those are the platforms that I'm on that I am actively creating content and educational content on. And then obviously also you can find me on my website. All of these different accounts are under my full name, Rahmeh Ramezany. Unfortunately, yes, I'm sorry, you will have to spell my name correctly. But given that, I'm like, you can find me at Rahmeh Ramezany on all of these platforms, exactly the same.
All right, awesome. And if you are listening on a podcast platform, I will have the correct spelling and links to everything.
Thank you.
So we've been talking about it for a little bit, and we always get into the weeds, and it gets jargony sometimes. But what does DEI actually stand for? What does it entail? Like, I know there's a lot of people that are interested in the concept of it, but they don't know the term for it. Yeah. So DEI is what?
The way I like to describe DEI to people who have never heard of it before, which I've actually met a number of people now in my personal life who've literally never heard of DEI, is it's social justice for organizations. Right. You're not necessarily going to protest. You're not necessarily going to be doing petitions. You're not going to like the capital of your state or your country or anything like that. That's like kind of more like traditional social justice. It's about social justice, but in like an organizational corporate, yes, but like nonprofits and that sort of thing, universities. So the idea with DEI diversity being that you can not just see that there's a room full of people and there are different kinds of people with different backgrounds and identities in this space. And I correct myself by saying that it's not what you can only see, because there are many people of all different kinds of identities, race, religion, gender, disability, on and on and on, that you can't visually identify that they are different or that they have a certain identity, right?
Right.
So it is also important, like, right, to keep in mind that it's not just visually diversity, though of course that is important as well. And then with inclusion, the idea being that just because there are people of different diverse backgrounds in the room, that does not necessarily mean that if someone speaks up, they're going to be listened to, that they're welcome, that they are going to have power to create change in that space. Like, they're just sitting there. They're just a token. They're just sitting there for the picture on the marketing website, right? Like, look, this is our one Black person in our company, right? And that's it. They don't ever have an opportunity to speak, which happens a lot. So, okay, great. They're included. They're welcome. They're accepted. They have power. They're being listened to. They're respected. All the things. Great. With equity, the idea being is recognizing that the playing field is not level. We like to say, like, level the playing field, and people who are kind of like colorblind. Oh, I don't see race. Oh, I don't see difference. I just treat everyone the same. We're not different races of people. We're the human race, all of that sort of like stuff. The idea being is like, we are different, and that inherently is not a bad thing, right? Like, the diversity of human beings is actually a beautiful, wondrous thing. And if you want to go more on like the business case side of diversity, equity, inclusion, is that they have done many studies that show that when you have a diversity of people in your organization, you are going to be more innovative, you're going to be more productive, you're going to have the most amazing ideas, and on, like, which for like under capitalism and under like an organization's priorities, then like, oh, we want to be more innovative. That's cool. So, okay, then you want to have that diversity of people, but also, again, that means that people are different. And that doesn't mean that difference equals bad. It just means that we need different accommodations. There's historical inequities that need to be accounted for. And when accommodations are reasonable accommodations, like no one is asking an organization to spend gobs of money on things that are just not even feasible, there are so many times where very reasonable accommodations can be made to make this an equitable place for your employees from diverse backgrounds to access, and also the removing of barriers so that they can thrive, because it's really barriers that are preventing them from doing the things that they are fully capable of doing.
Right. Yeah. The way that I've always described it, I don't know if you've heard this. Actually, you know what? I think I heard this on LinkedIn or from LinkedIn. Like the LinkedIn school thing, like the classes, like the module type, like kind of classes. I think I heard this there. And I'm going to try to say it, make it my own, I guess.
For sure.
But DEI, though, a great analogy that I've heard is diversity is like, you imagine your company or imagine your group or whatever you're trying to apply DEI work to. Imagine that as like a party. And diversity would be inviting the marginalized group to the party. So making sure that more women are there, making sure that more Black people are there, making sure more people from LGBTQ and or different religious backgrounds are at the party. That's diversity.
Yeah.
Inclusion is asking those people to dance, making sure that they're actually having a good time, making sure that they're a part of what's happening while they're there. Get them a drink, you know, make sure that you have appropriate snacks and things for them. That's so making them be a part of what it is. And equity is asking them to DJ, letting them be not only just invited to the party, not just included in the dance, but asked to lead parts of it, so that the parts of their culture, the things that have been traditionally left behind, are actually heard, and let them speak for themselves. So in the analogy, choosing the music, actually directing the direction of the party, and making sure that you don't just have people showing up, You don't just have people being included in the dance, but they're actually directing exactly how this is going to go. And that's probably the best analogy that I heard that kind of clicked in my brain and like made sense to me. Because I think a lot of times when people say, and somebody just kind of dropped this in the comments.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of times when people say diversity, they oftentimes forced diversity. What the commenter said was forced diversity is toxic. So a lot of times the point that you were getting to is we've all seen that liberal arts college, like, poster or like pamphlet that you get that's got the white kid and the Asian kid and the black kid and the Latinx kid on, you know, all sitting in the quad together, and it's like that's that forced diversity. But yeah, as soon as you get on campus, you realize that it's very segregated, and all those kids probably don't ever see each other or don't ever hang out with each other. And actually, somebody just dropped this in the comments as well. It's something that we talked about a couple of weeks ago on the show. Multiculturalism, which is, I think, more of the description of letting that culture decide, letting them DJ, versus being multiracial or multiple religions or gender diverse, right? Like, there's a difference between having people in the room and having them be listened to.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's a comment that came in that I want to address. And it says, if I have a party and care about what races I'm inviting, that sounds racist. So in a perfect world where different races of people or different identities overall, right? Different people of different religious identities, people of different genders, people from LGBTQIA versus heterosexual people. Like, in a perfect world, we would all be treated the same. We would not be getting discriminated against based off of our different identities, based off of biases, based off stereotypes on it. Like, great, awesome. In that world, if someone was actively trying to pay attention to like choosing and curating their friends list, who was in their company and all of that, yeah, I can see that like that would be very problematic. However, that is not the world that we live in, right? And also, like, the party analogy is an analogy. We're not trying to force anyone to invite someone to their home, like in real life. But the idea being also, even if we were talking about someone's friend group and not in DEI, the point more so is about organizations. But even aside from that, if you live in a multicultural place where there are people of different identities, it's not like a super homogenous place out like rural America or something like that. And like, there's a problem with why it's so homogenous for a different reason. But yes, pointing out race. I'm not sure. Okay. Anyway, the point being, so the point, okay. So the point being is that if you are surrounded by people that are very different from yourself, and yet somehow your friend group or your organization or your club, your hockey club, your soccer club after school or after work, that you somehow all happens to be exactly the same kinds of people, then that shows that there is a problem, that you are somehow directly or implicitly or explicitly discriminating against different kinds of people. Right. Unless it's like a cultural club where it's like a Black student union or a Muslim student union or an ERG where it's like intentionally meant to navigate and uplift people who are experiencing different areas of marginalization. The point is that if we lived in a post-racial society, which we absolutely do not, and I am not going to debate someone who thinks otherwise, then that's like, okay, you and I are clearly on different pages. I wish you well, have a good life, but like, you're not able to have this conversation at this level yet. We do not live in a post-racial society. That is something where when people get confused around, like, we're talking about race right now, like, oh, race is a social construct, so therefore it does not matter. And I'm like, race is a social construct and inherently doesn't exist. However, people actively choose how they interact with other people based off of race. So the implications of race absolutely are real. So we still have to talk about it. You can't just say, oh, race isn't a thing. It's a social construct. So therefore, let's just stop talking about it.
Right. So there's a difference between kind of a way that I've always said it is race is not real, but racism is real. So we still have to deal with it. And when we're talking about cultural groups, I'm really curious, like with this commenter or anybody listening, when you hear, Muslim groups, so you hear Black groups, so you hear East Asian groups, so you hear groups that are separated. Do you have the same energy when you hear groups that are traditionally viewed as white groups that also do those things? Like we have Polish clubs that meet. And they're all Polish Americans that talk about being Polish Americans. And that's a unique experience that me as a Black American, I can't relate to because I haven't had that experience. Now, there's some things that we can cross and relate to, and that's part of inclusion. That's part of equity that we're talking about. But when we're talking about cultural upliftment within your group, that's not the same thing as segregation. I hope that that's clear. Like cultural diversity and cultural upliftment of your group is not the same thing as being de jure segregation. And I think a lot of times we have this kind of like Wonderland version of like what we think segregation was or how long ago segregation was. Or how long ago a lot of these things were. Like we're definitely not post-racial, but we're also, I was actually just doing the math and just talking about it. My brother was the first person in my family line that was born post the Civil Rights Act. Like, wow. I just to put it into perspective how close for Black Americans it is. And I want to get into Muslim Americans in the religious aspect. That's why I brought you on here. But
for sure.
It is an anti-racism podcast.
Yeah.
So
it's all good.
Just to speak to that, like we're not that far away from those things. And when you talk about this in this kind of bubble, like white people should always be included, because that's what I'm going to just assume that you mean. White people should always be included in everything because we should always include those things. But we don't have that same energy for things that are decidedly, quote unquote, white people, but are broken up by different groups as well. You know, when you go to the Italian festival in your city, you don't say, where's all the Polish food or where's all the German food? When you go to Oktoberfest in your city, you don't say, where's all the Italian food? You know what I mean? We celebrate cultures all the time, especially in America, because we are supposed to be this melting pot. So we do celebrate cultures all the time. It just feels like whenever we're talking about a certain religion and whenever we're talking about people that aren't white, we end up having this conversation of, oh, now this is segregation. And it's because I think a lot of us, we haven't forgotten that it isn't that long ago. Segregation was not that long ago. And a subject that I want to talk about in a second. Yeah. The treatment of Islamophobia, we're not past it. Like we're not
alive. It's never gone down ever.
Right. We're not past these things. And to argue that we justified race segregation when we're talking about cultural upliftment of a group, I am curious if you have that same energy. So for anybody who felt that in your heart, I would give you the pushback or give you the suggestion of, do you feel the same way when you see things that are traditionally, you would say that that's a white person, but they're celebrating something about their culture? Like when you see that happening, do you have the same energy of its segregation, or do you see it as a cultural experience? Because I go to the Italian festival, the Hellenic festival, the Polish festival. I go to Oktoberfest every year, and I've never felt like this was particularly segregation as much as it's a celebration of that culture. And that's the difference. So I just wanted to make a distinction there, because we are talking about this, and I think a lot of people kind of get lost in the sauce, sort of like mired in the minutia of if diversity for diversity's sake is bad, or is diversity actually something that we should be encouraging. Like every study that we've ever done on it, heterogeneous groups work better, come up with better solutions, are just all around better for businesses or just any group.
Something to keep in mind, and again, I will say again that I am born and raised in the United States. I've spent most of my life in the United States. I've spent a couple of months at most outside, like together across the span of my life outside in other countries. So I am not aware of what goes on in other countries. This is the country I'm talking about, our context, okay? So in the United States, we have to understand that at the foundation, it is illegal, federally, state, all of that, to discriminate against someone based off of multiple different identities, including race, including religion, including sexual orientation, including many disability. If you go and look at job descriptions, when you want to apply for a job, they will say, we are an equal opportunity employer. We do not discriminate against blah, 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 blah. You could sue a company if you feel that as an applicant or as if you were in the job already, that they discriminated against you because of some part of your identity. And honestly, that is a part of the foundation of diversity, equity, inclusion, is that it was a field that came about so that companies could not get sued, right, for discrimination, because it is a direct result of the civil rights movement, right? And that there were a number of different laws that said you cannot discriminate against women, you can't not hire women because they are women, you can't not hire people of color because they are people of color. Okay. So then it progressively grew. It didn't start with like, hey, we found that it's more innovative to hire people from different identity groups because they have different lived experiences. They come at the problem in different ways. They have different problem solving techniques, which helps you think through more, on and on and on. Like, it didn't start with that. It started with, hey, we don't want to get sued because it is illegal to discriminate against people, right? So having said that, right, like, we have to recognize that why would it be important to set that law in place? If we lived in a post-racial society where people weren't being discriminated because of their identities, then why would we need a law like that? The point of the law is because it was happening. So respectfully, I do not usually engage with people who, and that in my DEI work, I try to be very clear. On my Instagram, I have one of my pinned posts saying that I don't engage with Islamophobes. Like, I set a boundary around, like, if someone is clearly speaking out of like devil's advocate or trying, is clearly an Islamophobe or clearly racist or clearly whatever, or is so completely uneducated in what is going on in our country that they, like, I had a comment this morning about a post that I did around a recent incident that I saw where I'm sorry, Brian, please let me know if this is something that you'd rather me not discuss. For you, it's like a black man. Sure.
I think I know the post that you're talking about.
Yeah, you saw the post.
But go on. Yeah, no.
But someone posted, like, why would you make it about white people? Why are you making this about race? And I'm like, you clearly have literally no idea what the broader context of this is. And I am not going to spend my time educating you when you literally have not been paying attention to anything, especially since 2020. So respectfully, for me, it's like, okay, we have to, like, the barest minimum foundation for myself, and like, we're talking with me, so I'm going to set this boundary of, like, the barest foundational minimum is that we have to recognize that we are not in a post-racial society, that people are discriminated against because of their identities, including, yes, religious identity, especially as a visibly identifiable Muslim woman. Islamophobia and attacks against Muslims is incredibly gendered because many Muslim women do choose to wear a headscarf called a hijab. And so it is very easy to see who the Muslims are. And so they attack the people they know are Muslim. So they attack women.
Right.
Right. On and on and on. So if there's not a recognition and a respect for that being important, then okay, fine. You don't want to be inclusive. Great. Don't be inclusive.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Beautifully stated. On here, usually in the comments, we'll let some people go
You're
a
nicer
little
than
bit,
me.
but we do, if it's just arguing just for the sake of arguing, arguing, I
Yeah.
protect my peace. I don't have time for it. And the story
Exactly.
that you're bringing up was, there was another, because it feels like there's always one, but there was another police altercation with a black man. And see, this is where it's important to talk about race, is because if I'm remembering the story right, it was the residents were white that came out and stood in the way of that officer. And those events are very, very, very different. If it would have been 8 black people that came out the house to stop that officer. And it's about understanding your place of privilege to be able to use it to stop the oppressive force. Like, if you're going to, how do I put it? I hope this is true. I've never confirmed this quote in my entire life, but I've just wanted it to be true. Sir Patrick Stewart said, it was like a bunch of years ago. I know, right? But he said, we live in a country that only listens to old white men. So as an old white man, I'm going to use my voice to speak for those who won't be listened to. And that's it. As soon as I read that story that you put up, that was like the first thing I thought of, was like, this is the anti-racism work. This is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Like, and it doesn't have to be as visceral as literally standing in the way of danger.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about acknowledging race, that's part of it. We don't live in a post-racial society that racism doesn't exist, and there is an implicit bias. And as a group of white people that are like, we're going to stand in the way and stop this, I thought that was a beautiful moment, and not to take that away from them. They stood up, and they knew they could. They knew they could stand in front of the police. Yeah. They knew
one
that they
front,
could do that.
One in back. Oh,
how many white friends do you both have? What is?
I haven't counted. Sorry. And also, I wanted to say, Her Divine Alchemy, thank you so much for joining from LinkedIn. The power of LinkedIn. Haha. Anyway. But yeah, no, to your point, like, something that the video where I found, like, someone on YouTube, I skipped through the video on YouTube where it was like, if this had been a neighborhood with black and brown people predominantly in it, and the neighbors had been black and brown coming out, guaranteed the police would have called for backup and said, we're being swarmed by aggressive, like, hostile people, and then they would have brought the tanks out and the SWAT and all of that. But because it was white people, they were like, oh, we can't, they're being unruly. And like, they were reading through the police report saying like they were getting in the way and they were obstructing, but not that they then arrested anyone because of it. They then just retreated and went away and nothing happened. Right. So yeah, anyway, all of that is to say, just like, yeah, all of that is to say about race. And then of course, keeping in mind, Ryan, I know I shared with you as well, and I want to call in for anyone listening, whether you're non-Muslim or non-Black Muslim like myself. Obviously, I am not Black. The idea being is that about 30% of the Muslims in the United States are Black. So Black Lives Matter, anti-Black racism is absolutely an issue for Muslims, that Muslims see each other, whatever our different identities are, as siblings in faith. And we have to stand together. I don't see this as a separate issue that other people are going through and, oh, too bad, that sucks. It's like, my Muslim siblings are being treated in this exact same way. And I have a responsibility. And this is something that I love about, like, the religion of Islam, is that my understanding and teaching and learning about Islam is that it is an incredibly social justice oriented religion, right? And so for me, I'm not as much of a like lawyer protest kind of person. There are people who are like that, and that's amazing. I'm not trying to disrespect. Everyone has like their own inclinations and skills and all of that. That's what's so cool about everyone pitching in with whatever their skills are
Right.
to participate in whatever way they can. Someone who's a parent, like with multiple children who has to like work and stuff like that is just not going to have the same capacity as a single college student, and on and on. So there's a place for all of us. And so just the idea that as Muslims, as non-Black Muslims, if there are any non-Black Muslims listening to this, to keep in mind also that this is not like a other person's issue.
Yeah, right, exactly. And I have a couple other.
I know, we're just gonna keep talking like.
No. This is
it's all good.
This is why I sent you the outline. And I was like, we're gonna start. It's gonna be kind of like this, but then we're just gonna go off on tangents and just keep going, and I love it. But something I want to say, just to throw this out there and say it, because as a Black person, I oftentimes get a lot of pushback when we start talking about these concepts. But I love quotes. I love history. I love what great philosophers have said. But Huey P. Newton was asked this same question. Asked the same question: why do you hate Black people, or why do you hate white people, or it was something along those lines. And his response was very simple: I don't hate white people. I hate oppression. I love white people.
Yeah.
I hate oppression.
Yeah.
That's all. That's it.
Yeah.
That's the thing. So asking me how many white people I know is ridiculous, because that isn't, I don't hate white people. I just said that all these white people that literally stood in the way of this officer that was going to harm this man did the exact right thing, because, and we can't ignore the fact that there is a certain amount of privilege there that they used. They took advantage of it to make this a safer place for a Black person. And that's the point. Yeah. That's the point of what of what we're talking about, is making these places, and to bring it back around to companies or nonprofits, making this feel like it's a safe place for the people of marginalized groups to exist, for them to not feel like they have to conform to the culture that is built in there. They have to shed themselves in order to conform to the culture or assimilate into that. They shouldn't have to do that. They should be able to live their full, authentic selves and feel safe and comfortable in that space. And sometimes that means white people using their privilege to be listened to give the mic to someone else. But you're a specialist in religion as part of DEI work, and I've been watching a lot of like your videos and reading all the stuff that you put on Instagram, and that's what kind of struck me, is this is a part of it that a lot of people don't talk about. We oftentimes really lean heavily on race, we lean heavily on gender, and we don't do the intersectionality of exactly what you were saying, things that you can't see. Like if I were to say that I'm Muslim right now, you would not have been able to tell, other than the fact that I told you just now. So the religious inclusion seems to be kind of a blind spot in a lot of DEI work. So how would you say that religion plays a factor, or where do you start with people when you want to talk about DEI in religion?
Yeah. So I start, as in all things, with what people already understand and grow off of that, which is like a pretty standard adult like learning model, right? I don't work with minors because children scare me. I didn't like high schoolers when I was a high schooler. People who are like middle school, high school teachers, like God bless them, I could never. So working with, adults and thinking about how adults learn and stuff like that. And especially, yes, with people who, especially when you talk about religion. So again, my context being the United States and the West, we are taught that it is not polite, it is not done to talk about politics and religion, politics and religion, politics and religion. So we literally don't have the skills of how to talk about religion in public without either proselytizing and like falling into like trying to convince each other to be a part of our own religion, or no, you're stupid, no, you're stupid, no, you're like just back and forth bickering, right?
Right.
So obviously that is not the goal. We want to be constructive. And so there needs to be very strong boundaries around what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. So just like in diversity, equity, inclusion work outside of religious identity, no one is trying to convince someone to change their lives to be a part of another identity group or like see that other identity group as better. This is something that I like about having educational, I have a master's in intercultural communication, and the idea of cultural humility, of like learning about other people's way of life in a sense that you can appreciate and see it as a good thing, as a positive. And also that doesn't mean that your different way of living is bad, right? That we need to be in competition or we need to like criticize each other. They can exist and you can exist at the same time, and you could just be like at the same time. Right? It doesn't have to be that we have to have conflict necessarily. Obviously, if there's a values difference, if one person is trying to like one up the other, then that's where the problem comes. Okay. So the idea being is that you absolutely cannot have anything around proselytizing or trying to convert people in the workplace, not at all. So I try to be very intentional about framing when I describe, like, I don't get too much into like the religion of Islam per se and the beliefs. One, because my audience are non-Muslims, and I am absolutely not trying to convert anyone, not at all. So it doesn't necessarily matter what Muslims believe, because I'm not trying to justify it to you. I'm not trying to like persuade you to believe it. So and also I try to be very, very clear that I'm not a religious scholar. I'm an incredibly imperfect Muslim myself, who I still have so much to learn. My audience is not other Muslims, because I'm sure there are so many other Muslims who know our faith better than me. My audience is about, as someone who has experience in diversity, equity, inclusion, talking about, hey, Muslims should be able to exist as ourselves. No, we're not trying to make you Muslim, but at the same time, we shouldn't have to like minimize ourselves and pretend we don't exist in order to like be allowed to have a job, to be allowed in certain spaces, right? Like, so there's that balance. So no, we're not going to be bringing, like, I've heard horror stories about like different religious groups, especially like, yes, Christians, bringing religious literature to a secular environment or like a non-religious, non-Christian environment, like passing it out, right? Oh, no. Like, no. And that would be completely inappropriate no matter what the identity group is. I would say the same thing to a Muslim. If I saw a Muslim doing that, that is completely inappropriate. You cannot be bringing Qurans or Hadith books or whatever to your workplace and passing them out. No, that is not appropriate. Don't do that. But then on the other hand, I don't want, like, too far on the other side of the spectrum are that Muslim women who choose to wear the hijab. Yes, there are many Muslim women who don't wear hijab because of choice. There are many Muslim women, yes, who are forced to wear hijab. So I'm not going to get into that. But yes, there are many Muslim women, many of them who choose, myself being one of them, to wear a hijab. Yes, in the West, all of the things. If they want to wear this, which has literally no effect on anyone else, it's not getting in the way. I can, like, tiny side note, I'm sorry, I have ADHD, which of course everyone on TikTok has ADHD, so I just assume it's a norm. Yeah, that's how we but the idea being, but like I get off on tangents, but like when I was like 16, 17, whatever, and I was doing my driver's test and I was wearing hijab at the time, my first driving test, it took me 3 times to pass. I liked being chauffeured too much to like really learn and pay attention to the studying. But anyway, the point being, like, they asked me like, oh, are you going to be able to hear through that scarf? And I'm like, what? Right. So so scarves, like, they don't interfere with my job in any way, but there are many Muslim women who will take their scarves off for an interview and for their job and then put it back on in their personal lives, because we have seen through studies, Islamophobia comes in one form in Muslim women are not getting hired if they wear hijab, in the same way that we've seen studies about many different kinds of people, including Black names, but people with any sort of non-anglicized name are much less likely to get an interview and to get a job purely based off of just their name. They've done studies, I'm sure, Ryan, you've seen, where they put literally the same resume, the exact same resume. They just changed the name and they send it out to like 100 plus different companies, and always the anglicized name. I do not say American because I am very careful. I had to unlearn this myself, and I try to make this a staple of like, American does not mean white. That is not the same thing. And just to be clear, I am half white. My mother is like mixed European ancestry, so whatever you want to call me, white or not white. But the point being is that like white does not mean American. American is not white. So I say non-anglicized, not an American name, which I know when some people say an American name, they mean a white name. Just to like, let's all just unlearn this white supremacy. Whiteness is the norm together. So yeah.
Yeah.
I could just keep going. You could just get off and I could just keep talking.
No. You're fine. I was looking at some of the comments. We're gonna jump into in a second. But actually, you know what? Let's jump into it now.
Let's just do it. Sweet.
There ever since 9/11, I don't know if I can even say that on the live without this like getting taken down in like 2.5 seconds. Ever since the attack, there's been just a bunch of, I mean, it was before it, but there's been almost like kind of co-signed, like establishment signed off Islamophobia. Politicians like, I mean, the Orange Man, you know, he gets into office and he makes bans on. I mean, I remember I had friends that had gone back to see family members, and then that ban happened, and they were like, I don't know if I can get home. Like, we don't know the rules. Like, there was so much that was surrounding that, and it just felt like we got to this kind of fever pitch of what Islamophobia, like sanctioned, that's the word I'm looking for. Like sanctioned of Islamophobia is kind of the norm. Like people are just okay with the certain amounts of racism that exist or happen. And my question to you is, how are non-Muslim people, what can you say about this, I guess, to kind of explain what it's like? I can explain or try to explain like the sensation of anti-blackness being like thrown the way, and I think you were kind of getting onto it, which this is something I didn't even think of. You're enlightening me to this concept right now, is that the hijab is such a visual, like there's a Muslim woman right there. And like
at a distance, you can see us like all the way over there. Like, I'm going to go get her.
Right. Exactly. Do you see, I mean, even in your work, do you see much pushback still, like with just the hijab? Do you see people trying to change the way that taking it off is that common? I just don't. I just want you to speak a little bit to like what the experience is and what that part of the culture is like, because we all have to deal with it in different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say for myself, so I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, and so that, as it is not a liberal heaven of like multiculturalism and tolerance, but it is much better than many other places in the country. I have only had a couple of instances where someone has yelled at me. One time I got in my own neighborhood, like literally standing a couple feet away from my front door. This was the week before the election for the orange person's re-election. I've never had an issue in my neighborhood, and someone drove by in a car, the window was open and they yelled out at me. It sounded like in another language, so I don't know what they were saying, but just the tone of voice communicated their intentions.
Right.
But then they circled back and came back another time. So I've had someone, say something to me in a grocery store just randomly. I'm walking in a grocery store buying groceries and someone murmurs something Islamophobic and keeps walking. And I'm like, excuse me, what? Right? I have had many friends, people online that I've seen who've experienced similar, worse. There are so many instances where people have been outright killed. Something that many people might not be aware of is that the first person to be killed, to be murdered, quote unquote, in revenge for 9/11 was a Sikh man who wore a turban, not a Muslim, but because they thought he was Muslim, this would happen to him. And that's something that is also important to know about Islamophobia, is that Islamophobia is discrimination or attacks, physical attacks against someone who is thought to be Muslim. Another example of someone who was killed because they were thought to be Muslim, what in fact were not, was an Arab man somewhere in the Midwest. His neighbor killed him because he thought he was Muslim. He is Arab, but he was Christian. Also, just like FYI, also everyone, not all Muslims are Arabs, not all Arabs are Muslim. Just like throw that out there. But so like, right, so they just assumed, right? A lot of people see me, they think I'm Arab, right? And I can understand why, but just the idea again, the whole like intersectionality and like you can't tell what someone is by what they physically look like and all of that. Okay, cool. So so that is why for me in the work that I do, like I had to think very deeply about what boundaries I was going to set around being a content creator online and engaging with random people from literally any of the parts of the world who could say whatever they wanted and who was going to get a response from me under what circumstances, who I was going to engage with, what client organizations I will take on and honor that. And so for myself, I knew that I could not, and this is one of the reasons why I don't do too much around Islamophobia unless I have a good handle on my like nervous system, that it is so painful. It is so painful. There was a execution basically of 3 college students in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, the last year of my undergraduate degree. So we were the same age, a couple and the wife's sister and their neighbor who they had been having very serious problems with for, I think, like months, got into their house and shot them execution style. And the police report after the fact was that it was about a parking dispute. And the 2 women, the sisters, they both wear hijab. And I believe that they were Arab, Syrian, I believe. So that happened. Again, I was around the same age as them. My friends were all around the same age as them. That, and every year I see the anniversary. For myself, that in particular stands out so much to me because that could have been me. That could have been any one of my friends. And seeing it come out as, and which I think like a lot of communities, when they have something like this happen and then the report afterwards is like some nonsense. Like it was over a parking dispute. Are you freaking kidding me? And seeing what the husband's sister, who then started a foundation and was pushing back against, like it was a park. Anyway, all of these things is that we have to navigate people's biases against us in every space in public. There are many people who will change their name to something anglicized to prevent discrimination in the workplace. There are women who will change what they wear. I have friends who are like, I don't wear black. they don't wear black in public because they don't want to fall into like what people have seen of like scary Middle Eastern people that they presume are all wearing black. And there's like so many people who are not Muslim who just like wearing black. That's just their aesthetic, is that they wear black, right? And literally just having to choose like what I know when I go into an airport, even today, it's much better today than it used to be. But I am like super peppy and super happy and smiley and making jokes when I'm in an airport to be as non-threatening as humanly possible. And every single time I'm randomly selected. And then they take this wipe to wipe my hand down in front of everyone, of course. And I'm pretending that I don't notice that people are probably staring at me. They wipe my hand down with this thing to like see if I've touched metals that for making a bomb recently, every single time. So yeah, it's tough and we have to manage ourselves. And for myself, like, that's why I focus my work on the bare minimum of people have the right to exist as they are. And people's identities are not inherently evil. Like, if you're going to come at me and say, oh, black people are inherently inferior to someone, I'm like, nope, I'm off. Nope, we're not going with that. If you come and say, well, inherently Islam is like a barbaric religion, right? Like, nope, okay, we're done. Like, at the bare minimum, we have to agree that all these different identities get allowed to exist. We're not saying that you have to be like us. You don't have to be like us. But we get to exist like this. Cool. Okay. And then going into inclusion, because there are many, many people, and I'm very grateful to have like interacted and met and connected with so many people who do genuinely want to know how to include Muslims, how to be culturally competent with them. And to those people, like, they literally just don't know what they don't know. And if they have the information, they are more than happy to go and run with it. Right. So for me, like, my focus is those folks. But then also, yes, like, I do touch on Islamophobia when I have like a good handle on my mental health.
No, I completely understand. Especially if you're going to be in this work, have a therapist.
I watch a lot of like funny nonsense, like cat videos and funny stuff. Like, that is very therapeutic for me, of just like nonsense, funny, not meaningful, just like zoning out. Yeah, that helps me a lot.
I feel like often on the show, or even in my work, I tell people, take a break, take a minute, decompress from like whatever it is, whatever we're talking about that might be heavy. DI work is sometimes you get into kind of arguments or back and forths, or and you have to kind of steer conversations. I'm sure as a practitioner and someone who consults, you have to steer the conversation to be like, hey, hold on, wait a second, we're all allowed to exist. Yeah, that's the main thing. And just kind of makes me think of like main tenet of anthropology, like, if it's real to them, it's real. And that's So to the point that the person was making a little bit earlier, basically saying that, like, if we are trying to do things consciously about race or religion, that's being somehow racist, or that's being somehow prejudice, or, you know, whatever, to whatever group that we're not thinking about. It's because as minority or marginalized groups, we have to always think, we have to always constantly think about what's going to happen next. Like, I wonder how many people often think about, like, oh, I can't wear black outside because I will give off this thing that's really scary to some people, and they might be uncomfortable. I don't know how many times I've walked into a store or a building or anything like that and immediately took my hood down. Exactly. Because I can't walk in with a hoodie on. Nope. Like, because I can't have my hood up. I remember when COVID first started, or like the lockdowns first started, or like, you know, everybody was wearing masks and stuff like that. And I remember having to like go to the bank or go to the store. I had to go somewhere and I was like, I have a mask on and a hoodie. I can't go. I can't go anywhere dressed like this. Like I'm not allowed to cover most of my face. And like, no, the camera's got to be able to see me. You got to know who I am. Or else I'm going to get followed around the store. And that's part of it. DEI work is, in my opinion, you can touch on this. DEI work, in my opinion, is made specifically so that people can live their most full lives in their skin, in whatever they are, express themselves completely and fully without feeling like they have to conform or shed something off in order to be that. Like I think about the Crown Act, which just got shot down by Congress. It's not going to be a law. We're probably going to bring it up again in a year. But how often do people think about just their natural hair? I'm not talking about doing anything
literally
to it.
Growing out of your head.
Just what your hair does, just as it grows. How often do you have to consider like, oh, I won't get this job, or I won't make it past this first interview if this. I've been in interviews where they were like, oh, you should cut your hair, or you should do this, or you should do that. Like, you should clean this up or do this. And it's just kind of remarkable to me that when we talk about inclusion or we talk about equity and people say, well, it's racist or it's prejudice to focus on those things. And it's like,
it's the difference between equity and equality. These people are looking at equality as if all people are the same. And so we give everyone the same. And that's fair, when that's not the case at all. Right. There is a really amazing image that I've seen, and I use this in my presentations and my trainings, where you have 4 different kinds of people, all of which are trying to ride a bike. I don't know if you've seen this image. It's like green.
I always see the fence and the base, like
the
baseball,
fence.
The fence one. Tell me the bicycle one.
The bicycle one, I really like it. I'll send it to you later. And so you have 4 different people, all like different. So one person is in a wheelchair. One person is very tall. One is like medium sized, and one is a child, right? So short, very short. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then you give them the exact same bicycle. The person in the wheelchair clearly cannot use that. So they're literally just sitting in their wheelchair next to the bike, not being able to use it. Okay. The person who is very tall is like hunched over. You can see, like, if anyone has been on a bike that is like, they are clearly too big for, like, their knees are all the way up into their chest. Like, it's very awkward. Their back is hunched over, all the things. Okay, cool. And then you have like the medium-sized person, and the bike fits perfectly. Amazing. And then you have the child who can't fit their feet into the pedals. They're like barely able to hold on to the handles and like are clearly going to fall over. But it's the same bike. It's equal treatment. But clearly, obviously, that's not the best solution. And then the second half of the image is where people are given different bikes. Someone in a wheelchair is given something that has been designed for someone with a wheelchair to be able to use this bike. And it's amazing. Right. And they're able to use it the same way. The person who's very tall gets a bigger bike, the person, like, and on. Right? And equitably means that the result is the same, because inherently people are different. Difference is not bad, but that means that people need different accommodations or removal of barriers to then have the same equal result in the end, right? So anyone who is coming to any conversation around like, oh, this is like reverse racism or reverse segregation or is coming at it that inherently all people are the same, so therefore we provide everyone the same, and that's what fairness is, when that could not be further from the truth.
All right. Have you heard of the it's such a silly name, but have you heard of the Jedi model?
Oh, yes.
And I
justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, right?
Right. Yes. Yeah. And switching around the order to focus on like to kind of triage what you need to do. Like we need to establish or have the idea of justice first, equity, and then we can and then the diversity will make sense, and then the inclusion will make sense. But if our focus isn't providing justice and equity to those diverse groups, including them doesn't matter. Like you have to do those things all together at the same time. And we talk about it in lists and things like that, but these are all things that have to work together at the same time. You got to do them all at the same time, or else it doesn't work. There's somebody in the comments talking about how they got singled out because of their background on a Zoom call. Saying that they couldn't be visible or they couldn't be seen because of the contrast. They're dark skin and they had a very light background, so they couldn't make out who they were, or whatever it is. Yeah. And we can also talk about like how racist cameras are. Like,
that's a whole other coverage thing. About that. That's crazy. Ultimately, not too surprising in the end, but the idea, an unpopular opinion might be, is that if the work of DEI is in organizations and organizations are in a hyper-capitalist, white supremacist system, there really isn't much hope of justice. We can try and remove barriers for people, equity. We can give accommodations for people, equity. We can make sure that they are being listened to in meetings, inclusion. We can make sure people are being hired, diversity. But the work of justice, I personally believe, I am one person. My opinion is one opinion. I would love to be wrong. My humble opinion is that the work of justice is much broader than the scope of diversity, equity, inclusion work. I have so much respect for it. I would love to be wrong, but that is my personal opinion. Similarly, if you have heard of like belonging being tacked onto diversity, equity, inclusion.
Yeah, I've heard that as well.
Yeah, there's all kinds of acronyms. They like to do EDI, to do equity first, then diversity and inclusion. Like there's all kinds of things. Yeah, it's like the same field. It's the same field.
That's like great. It's all the same thing. We're all talking about the same thing.
DI used to be D and I, all the things. Okay, cool. So the idea with like, and I also have a bit of a like issue personally. Again, I'm one person. An issue with belonging, because for myself, the way I see, again, DEI is about organizations and workplaces and companies and stuff. And even in like a university setting, even though a university is, yes, a workplace for many people, it's not just students. But also the idea for me with belonging, I don't want to belong to a workplace. I want to be treated equitably. I want to be treated with respect. I want to be included. I want to work with a diversity of people. But for me, the way I define belonging, and I actually did post about this on LinkedIn and had an amazing conversation. I'm going to like convert you, Ryan, into LinkedIn. But anyway, you let me know. I'll send you. I have a whole list of people.
Mine up.
It's a really cool community of DEI and anti-racism and social justice people.
Yeah.
Anti-capitalism, all the things. You let me know. I'll hook you up with all the people you need to follow. But anyway, anyone else interested as well, listening, I have a resource page on my website, actually, of all the kinds of DEI folks that you should follow. You can find it on my website, rahmehremezany.com/resources. So anyway, having said that, with belonging, I put this forward to the other DEI folks on LinkedIn that I'm in community with. And I put forward like, for me, the way I define belonging is for my family, is for my friends, is for my community. It's not for work. And so I had a lot of very interesting, and I respect other people's opinions of like, they want, like a lot of people don't have family members that they're close with, and they want to have good relationships with their coworkers. For myself, I feel like, especially given we're seeing all these mass layoffs and the way companies literally just like don't even let you know, you just go in to sign on to work, or they message you like the night before you sign on to work, you don't have access to your email, they've kicked you out, you literally don't get to say goodbye to anyone. All the like horror stories about layoffs, anyone who's, thank you, MS. I appreciate you like the idea, like
you
all
get
of that.
Invited to that calendar invite that's only 5 minutes long.
Oh my God, yes. I have had that happen. It's like I've been laid off in the past.
Lord.
It's really it is really traumatic, right? And so like in that environment, especially also like with so many people, especially BIPOC people, especially Black people, especially Black women being treated the ways that we know that they are treated in the workplace, but then you're now gaslighting us, in my opinion, gaslighting people into being like, hey, this is a feeling of belong. No, this is where I come to pay my bills. This is how I pay to feed myself and my family. Like now I feel like by pushing belonging, it's like making us play this act that we have to be best buddies and like we're a family and all. Like for me, it's all of that. And I do appreciate, thank you. I do want to represent that this is not a common opinion amongst the DI folks that I'm in community with. But I would just put it forward that I feel like we're just pushing people to pretend to be friends and we're all like really not friends. And now it's just like another level of like emotional labor to like pretend that I'm going to invite you to my house or like, what did you do this weekend? Oh, let me tell you. No, I don't want to tell you. Mind your business.
Well, I think I think where that really comes from, and I've in some of the DEI work that I've read, or like the academic kind of side of it, sort of like discussing the meta analysis, talking about it.
I love that. I love meta analysis.
Where I've heard this, because this your opinion, I have heard this same pushback.
Okay,
and with people being like, I think belonging. I think there's a way to describe what we're talking about that isn't necessarily that word.
Yeah.
And it feels like that word is like kind of a corporate takeover of what DEI is, because we still live in a society. And this is like another thing where you have to understand is that we still live in a society where even though we have DEI work in a lot of these companies, they have these departments. They have DEI departments and they have like whole sections of what people do. They're still led. I think it's no. What is the statistic? It's like 80 or 90%. It was something very, very high that I had to double check because I was like, that feels crazy. But it was 80 or 90% are still led by straight white men.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to feel like you're not being gaslit when the guy that's teaching you about diversity training or talking about equity isn't affected by the results of the DEI work. So that's why that's the pushback I've heard. It's like this kind of belonging thing is like sort of getting back to this. Let's have a pizza party and become family, and like we'll have all these outings and we'll all go bowling twice a quarter. And it's like, no, I don't want to do any of that. I just want to be able to come into work with my dreads or my hijab and not feel stared at by Karen. I don't like or every time we talk about a raise or a promotion, I want to be able to be in that conversation without being the Black candidate or the Muslim candidate or the hyphenated candidate. I want to be able to be my full self, but still be myself. In that space.
Yeah.
It feels
the way
like belonging.
I like to say it is like how be as much of my full authentic self as I wish to reveal.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly that. How much I want to be in this space, but still feel comfortable that I can do that. Like if the culture that you are cultivating, even if you have the Black leadership, or even if you have religiously diverse leadership, but the culture is still centered around white, Anglo-Saxon, Americanized, assimilated culture, it doesn't matter who's in charge if they can't influence the culture that you're cultivating. That's the difference between being multiracial and being multicultural. Just because you have the diversity, you have to also include them. You also have to have the equity along with it. You also have to have them be able to steer the ship.
Absolutely.
In a way that is representative of everybody. So everybody feels comfortable. When I show up as an authentically, if I feel psychologically safe to do so.
Psychological safety is huge. Psychological safety is huge.
Right. Yeah. Like your psyche is very important. And a lot of times, and this is what a lot of people don't see, especially with, not to pick on you in particular, but especially with Black women who are often seen as aggressive, or if you speak up, you're being aggressive. This happens to women in general. If you speak up, you're seen as aggressive, or there's the trope of the female boss or the woman who is in charge. The woman who is in charge is bitchy if she's assertive. But if a man is in charge, he's assertive and he's a leader. If a woman is in charge, she's bitchy and aggressive. But they exhibit the exact same behavior. And
there's so many different examples. Like
there's so much we could talk about. We could talk about emails and smiley faces. We could talk about sorry and thank you for things.
Have you seen the jokes where it's about like how many exclamation points in an email before you start looking insane? Like count. Like, okay, I can put one at the first and then I can put it at the last. Oh my God, the whole thing. Like I absolutely am guilty of that. I know like what I mentioned earlier about for myself, learning that I pushed myself unconsciously to be I am obviously like talkative. I come from a very strong line on my mom's side of very talkative, loud women. So it's not like it didn't come somewhat naturally, but like I was clearly like really pushing the talkativeness so that I could prove that Muslim women aren't oppressed. So in that way, like in the workplace, if I were to be, and there are many people of all different identities, Muslim women included, who wear hijab included, who are just naturally more quiet and naturally not super talkative and bubbly in public or at all. But now they're in a place where they're being assumed to be not having ambition, to not being good at their jobs, to being so submissive, being asked passive-aggressive, microaggressive questions about like, is your husband okay with you doing this? What does your father think about this? Like, excuse me, if you're being asked like to go to a work trip and it's like, will your husband let you come on this work trip? It happens. People ask Muslim, and also again, with Islamophobia, not just being Muslim people, also people they think are Muslim, so they can ask South Asian people or Southeast Asian people. They ask Arab people whether they're Muslim or not. What does your husband, will your brother like it? Well, yeah.
The horror stories of like even women not wanting to reveal a pregnancy at work until the last second because they don't want to be treated different or they don't want to lose out on that promotion or lose out on that gig or that job, whatever your work is, because it's seemed for some reason. And I feel like this is a very West American kind of thing that I could say this is like an American thing. It's like we treat pregnancy like it's an illness. And it's not.
It is very much treated like it.
Yeah, it's treated like a woman says that she's pregnant and you go, oh, like you're about to say, oh no, like you're excited for a baby, but oh no, like whatever's happening to you physically is going to impair your job. And it's like, it's not. Being pregnant isn't an illness. We shouldn't treat it like that. Let's stop doing that completely. But these are all things.
Sorry,
well, I was going to say.
Yeah.
And these are all things that, like, just kind of, we keep circling this point, and I just want to keep hammering it home. It's the point of this kind of department being at your job is because if you think, I'll say it like this. If you think that DEI work is pointless, or you think that you don't need diversity training, or you don't need any of that, you're the person that absolutely needs it. Because the people who it affects, they already know that it's needed. They already think about it. If you don't think about it, or it's something that never crosses your mind, like, you never think about the racial makeup of your company. Like, why, that doesn't bother you at all. But the one black person does. They think about race every day. Constantly. Because somebody brings it up every single day. If you don't think about religion or like what holiday is coming up, you just walk in, you say Merry Christmas, you ask people what they're doing, and the one Muslim person in the room, they constantly think about it. They think about Christmas more than you do. Because they worry about it. They worry about what you're going to say, especially if they feel unsafe psychologically, or they feel like they may be singled out for whatever it is. So if you're listening to this, or you're listening to anybody that says anything about DEI work, anti-racism work, religious inclusion work, anything like that, and you think your initial gut reaction is, well, that's not something we have to worry about, or that's not something I have to worry about, or that's not something insert whatever has to worry about or think about, I need you to stop, pause, take a moment, and think, would I want to be the person that I'm talking about? If I was that person, like, I just heard somebody today ask somebody in a comment on TikTok, like you talk about how, like, we're equal under the law and everything is okay, but if you woke up tomorrow and you were a black person, would you be okay with it? And the guy was like, maybe not. So that is the question that I would encourage people to ask themselves. Once, if your gut reaction is, we don't need this, you need to say, if I was a woman working at this company, would I feel the same way? If I was a Muslim person working at this company, if I was a Jewish person, if I was black, if I was Asian, East Asian person working at this company, would I feel like we don't need this? And I think that's an important thing to think on and focus on. Sorry,
No. I have a horrible, again, it's the ADHD. I have a horrible issue with interrupting people, and always have. I am still trying to be better about it, but we'll see. But anyway, I wanted to speak to this comment that came in earlier from Ali Collins Productions that says it feels like there's no way to win, because that is absolutely something that many people in this work, paying attention to this work, who care about these values, whatever the terms are, but the values about caring for other people, that we are, like, the people who love to say, I don't see race, we're all the human race. It's like, I agree with you. And also I see that my siblings in humanity are being treated unjustly. I'm being treated unjustly. And this is my sibling. I care so much about this person who is not me. And I have to go and intercede. It's actually funny because I literally just wrote up a post for LinkedIn later. I asked my sister, who's in Spain right now, permission to post a picture of her, because we look like twins, even though we're not. So I have to wait for her to wake up to get permission. But the post being literally that, because in my content, I do use the term like siblings. This is my sibling in faith, my black siblings, my Southeast Asian siblings, my whatever. This is like a term that I use a lot. And it's very intentional. It's not a metaphor. Some people use cousins as well, which is cool. For myself, I didn't ever grow up with and I don't have a close relationship with my cousins. So it just doesn't resonate with me as much, but it's like basically the equivalent, where it's like, when I was growing up, I'm one of two daughters. Me and my sister were 18 months apart. We have incredibly different personalities. And so as children, so my sister hates being told what to do, and I love telling people what to do. And so, as you can imagine, like, being children, we don't have like any emotional regulation skills. We don't have like critical thinking. We're not able to like communicate our differences and come to some sort of understanding. So we just fought all the time, just constantly butting heads. But all throughout growing up, if anyone said something rude, if anyone disrespected my sister, if ever anyone was mean to my sister in front of me, I would bite their head off. I would go off on them because that was my sister. I could do that, but no one else can do that. Right. And I think that's something that a lot of people who do have siblings or have someone like their cousins or someone that they feel very familiarly close to can resonate with. And the idea being that when you have gone to the point of understanding that if we are one human race, that this is our human family, if this was really your sibling who's being treated in such a way, and this is something I also talk about and I try and like repeat the message, is that at the heart of it, social justice work, whether it's DEI, whether it's anti-racism, whether it's anti-capitalism, whatever the case may be, like people who critique those of us doing this work in whatever capacity, you're like, you're so angry all the time. Why are you so angry all the time? This work, the anger that you see is like such a pure expression of love. It's because we love our families, our communities, our human siblings who are our siblings, that different in culture and color and gender and like all of that, like as a social construct is made up. I love them so much and I see their pain. And their pain hurts me. Their pain is my pain. And I cannot it doesn't bother me. If my sibling, if my sister, me, Rahim, if my sister was standing in front of me and someone yelled at her and was rude, I would be the first one, like, I'd like, sit down. I'm going to get this person. Like, I'm not going to let this happen. Right? So that is to all the people, all that is to say is that when you say we're one human race, I agree with you. But that doesn't mean that then, therefore, like, we don't do anything about it. It's like, okay, your siblings in humanity are facing this injustice. What are you going to do for your sibling? If someone hurts someone you love dearly, are you okay with that? Really?
Right.
Then that means some part of your soul has died that you don't care. Right? So anyway, I'm going to have some water.
It makes me think about like when critiquing, especially this comes up in the Black community and anti-racism work, because we oftentimes have to critique establishments and we have to critique the police. And when we talk about the disparity, we talk about these things that happen, you know, like the case that you had brought up earlier today. We talk about that. I so many times, to an exhausting amount, get somebody that brings up some sort of stat or tries to that says something along the lines of, well, white people get shot by the police too, or white people get unalived by the police too. And my response to them is, then why aren't you next to me? Then why aren't you with us? If this is a problem that you said, yeah, this affects you and it affects me.
Great! Join us!
Come on, dude. You're almost there. Come on. Come on and join us. The water's fine. We're gonna make the world a better place for everybody.
Yeah.
That's the point, is to make the world a better place for everybody. So somebody asked a little bit earlier, and then I'll let you get running because we're coming to the end here. But somebody asked, and I told you that I would love giving actionable items. So how can non-Muslims, what's a tip 1 to 3 that you can give to make to someone who's non-Muslim, Christian, non-religious, whatever, and they're like, I want to be a safe space for the Muslim people in my community, my Muslim brothers and sisters. Like, how can I be? How can I exude that I am a safe space for them? Like, what can I do?
So the first thing that I would recommend, I'm going to preface it with something that I really appreciated learning from a Jewish creator that I follow on TikTok, and I really love her content, is talking about the more that you try and tell me that you're an ally, the less I believe you. And I think that this can apply to a lot of different groups. I see the exact same, I witness it from between people who come into Black content creators or educators, comment sections on TikTok or on other apps and say, I'm an ally. And then they say something racist. But they call themselves like, okay, so you can say that you're an ally, but the more you keep badgering me, telling me, no, but I'm with you. No, I'm an ally. Like, okay, the less and less and less and less I believe you. Right. So the point being is that I don't want to ever give these recommendations and then someone listening feels emboldened, like, I'm an ally to Muslims. And then they introduce themselves with, I'm an ally to, like, okay, I don't believe you. Like, if you tell me that, I don't believe you. Like, you have to prove it to me. You have to earn my trust. Okay. Just like anyone, again, just like any group. And this is part of the way I do my work is by trying to, again, intersectionally show that the ways and strategies and tactics that I give around Muslims or religious inclusion can very much be applied to other identity groups as well. So like you're learning the same tactics that you could then apply multiculturally and across different identities. Amazing. Okay, cool. So just keeping in mind that just because you tell someone you're an ally, like that's like a very easy way to get my hackles up and to be like, I'm questioning you. So you have to prove it through your actions and words and all of that. Okay, great. So first off, I would say that through no fault necessarily of their own, most non-Muslims in the United States have never really had the opportunity to have any sort of substantial conversation with a Muslim because Muslims are about 1% of the population in the United States. There are about an estimated 3 to 6 million Muslims. However, we're not like, and that's a very wide like margin for error, but the US Census does not count religious identity. So there are like different groups that have done different like estimations of how many Muslims there are. So having said that, of those Muslims that exist in the United States, they tend to fall under or in the areas of like major metropolitan areas. Like I mentioned, I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. There are a lot of Muslims in the San Francisco Bay Area. There are a lot in LA. There are a lot in the major cities in Texas. There are a lot in New York. There are a lot in Washington, D.C. On and on and on, right? There's a lot in like Michigan, stuff like that. So if you don't live in any of those areas, you probably have never met a Muslim because there might not be any Muslims. And also, even if you have happened to walk by a Muslim, one, you might not know they're Muslim because, again, it's not necessarily obvious from the outside looking at someone that they're Muslim. And even if you could identify that someone was Muslim, them walking by you and not having any sort of substantial conversation is not going to break any barriers or like, oh, I broke so many stereotypes seeing someone walk by me. Like, no, right? Okay. So having said that, that's why a huge reason why I put out the content that I do to like literally just normalize Muslims as existing and not being like some random aliens that like aren't human. As an example, this was many, many years ago. A friend and I, who both of us wear hijab, went out to see a movie in a theater and we got out. She's like, we're the same age. So like, and we both speak it with American accents. We're both American, all the stuff. Right. And my friend heard at a distance a woman say like, I didn't know they could go to the movies. Like I had last year, I did a podcast with someone who is not Muslim, who had never really had like any conversations with Muslims. She said that I was like the first Muslim she had ever had like an actual conversation with. And we were doing kind of the podcasty, getting our jitters out like thing. Yeah. And we were just talking about whatever. And Disney movies came up. And so we both really love Disney movies. And so we started going into like, if anyone likes Disney movies or fandom stuff of any kind, like you start comparing your favorites and like, does this count? No, this doesn't count. No, that's not canon. No, like whatever stuff. And so we started getting into that. What's your favorite? Princess? No, not princess, like all the things. And like, it was very obvious on her face that she had never considered that like a Muslim could like Disney movies like she did. Right. And this is someone who works in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Right. So having said that, like all of this is to say, my first recommendation is the amazing thing about social media is that most people are active on some social media site. Go and find Muslim content creators who put out content of their life of just existing while Muslim. I'm not saying you have to go follow like content about Islam, the religion, or like learn about Islam, the religion. I am not trying to convert anyone, but this is my day in a life. Get ready with me while I talk about this thing that happened at work today. Here's my shopping haul, whatever, like all the videos that you see on other kinds of creators make. See the humanity. See how we are like you, you are like us. We are one human race. Break down these biases in your mind that Muslims are these like just alien, absurd people who have just completely unrelatable lives, who care about things that you couldn't possibly care about, who are just uber strict. And yes, of course, there are people who are more strict than others, but there are about 2 billion Muslims around the world. About 25% of the world's population is Muslim. Muslims are not a monolith. There's so much diversity. And in the United States, specifically around race, Muslims are the most racially and ethnically diverse religious group in the United States. We have the most diversity ethnically. So having said that, go and start breaking down these biases and stereotypes that you have in your mind, which most likely come from the media, which that's the whole other spiel. I want to respect your time. You can follow me on social media so you can find out more of my talking points. But anyway, go follow Muslims on multiple, at least 5. And as you are already going to be on your social media anyway, when they come up on your feed, great. Spend 30 seconds, spend a minute, watch their video, read their post, whatever. Drip, 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 drip. Over 6 months, over a year, whatever, you're going to, the next time someone says something Islamophobic in your presence, you're going to have this like, oh, but I've seen this Muslim person who is very much like me. And they didn't seem like that. Like just that inkling of doubt of like, not just assuming that this completely absurd thing someone has said. All Muslims are terrorists. All Muslims hate Americans. All Muslims are this. Blah, 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 blah. Islam is an oppressive religion. Muslim men hate all women. Whatever. Right. So having said that, that is something that I really highly recommend everyone do. If you can learn about Ramadan, the basics of it, because Ramadan right now is coming up. It's projected to start on March 22nd. I say projected because we don't actually know until the day before. Jewish and Muslim calendars are on a lunar calendar, so it's like with the sighting of the moon. So anyway, just having said that, like get to know a little basics about like fasting and what Muslims need around fasting. If you have, I think someone shared that they're a teacher, that they have, Muslim students who will be fasting or not fasting or might be taking time off for Eid al-Fitr, which is the holiday at the end of Ramadan, stuff like that.
Yeah. And but before I ask you to plug all the things, I just want to touch on 2 things somebody said. Mm-hmm. So the first thing is they said, if I can't label myself an ally, can I label myself an anti-racist? And my answer to that would also be no, because anti-racism is an act, just like allyship is action. So it is not an identity. And I think that's the point that we're getting here. Being an ally is not an identity that you assume and you put on. You're not an ally, you act in allyship. You're not an anti-racist, you act anti-racist. You do anti-racist things. It's not something performative. It's not something that you just that you put on. You put on this suit and then suddenly you like, yeah, I'm this. And that drip thing, I'm gonna steal that from you. That's amazing.
That's what I do. That's how I have learned. And I say this as a recommendation to people all the time because that is literally what I do. That's what I do on all the social media platforms that I participate in. Especially one of the things I love about TikTok is that literally any identity that you want to learn about, there are so many people talking about that identity. I have learned so much about how to be an ally, to attempt to be in action an ally to the Black community because of Black content creators coming and saying, this is what we need allies to do. This is what we need you to do. This is what we don't need you to do. Don't do this. Don't do this. Do this. In this situation, do this. In this situation. I'm like, okay. I've been educated. We talked about black hair. I'm learning about black hair because I'm not going up to random people in the street and be like, can I touch your hair? can you teach me about your, no, right? About Muslims, I'm learning a lot about Africa right now because I've gone onto the side of TikTok where like there's African people in Africa talking about Africa, which is amazing. Like so many people that you can follow, and I've done it, and it's very possible for you all.
And that's what she's talking about is a amazing way to disrupt your implicit bias. So yeah, in a year, in 6 months, in 3 months, whatever, when somebody says something that's Islamophobic or that's racist in your presence, you'll have this. You're retraining your brain to get rid of all that implicit bias that you've had because we still live in this system. So the notion or the idea, and I just want to impart this on people before we go, the notion or idea that because you want to, you can just suddenly pull yourself out of the system that we're in and exist somewhere else outside of it. That's a fallacy. That doesn't exist.
It's
you can't
not possible
just say,
for anyone to do that.
You can't just say, well, I know like it's a white supremacist society, but I don't subscribe to that. So because I don't subscribe to that, it's not my brain. None of it exists. All of this. It's like, no, it's all still there. You have to retrain the way that you think and the way that you act in your initial gut reaction to things, your implicit bias, a bias that you don't even think about, that is unconscious to you, that just comes up. And this kind of, I'm going to label the drip technique. This works beautifully for that because a lot of it is othering. White supremacy feeds off of this idea of the other. So if you stop making those people the other, then once you hear those things that are harmful to that community, you'll know immediately to be like, oh, well, that's not true. This happened with me personally, like as an anecdote with the Muslim community. A friend of mine said just flippantly, well, I mean, that's like a barbaric religion. I mean, and there's like, it's only just like a few of them. And like, it's, it's this is that in the 30s, said all this stuff. Yeah. And I was like, there's billions of Muslims around the world, right? Like do you know that? They're not all bad people, right? Like that's like saying like, because of the history of Christianity, literally every single person that says that they're Christian did the Crusades. Like that's not fair. Yeah. Like yes, address history, address past, address problematic things.
Curse the people now who are causing harm and who are bad people. Pick anyone listening to this at any point. Right. Pick any identity that you are a part of. Would you see it as factual if someone said that about all men are evil? Like there's so many videos on TikTok where men are like going crazy and then comments like, not all men, not all men, not all men, not all men. Same with Christianity, not all Christians, not all Christians, not all Christians, not all Christians, not all straight people, not all straight people, not all straight people. Like you don't like it, we don't like it. And it actually isn't true. It is not true that all people of any group is any way. The point is that the media has portrayed this one version of, yes, there are Muslims who say that they are Muslim, who commit heinous, horrific, unjustifiable, completely un-Islamic, by the way, actions, and say that they're doing it in the name of a religion. And yet there are also, and that is the only thing that gets focused. And yet there are so many other Muslims, the majority of Muslims, who speak out against it, who are against it, who condone it, who never act in any way similar, the same way with all these other marginalized groups. There is no all people in any group that act a certain way.
Right. All right. Well, Rahmeh, do me a favor and restate your name, where we can find you, all the things. Plug everything.
So you can find me on your social media of choice as long as it is one of 4. I am active on TikTok, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and on Instagram. Please feel free to follow me on any or all of those platforms. I really appreciate your support and, engaging on the content there, because I truly do try and educate people, again, as I've mentioned, and participate in the drip technique where people get to read or watch little clips of posts versus text or video and get to know people over time. Don't just look at me. I am not a template for all Muslims, not at all. I'm not trying to at all put myself on a pedestal. So please don't only follow me, follow other Muslims, but you can find me at Rahmeh Ramezany on any of these 4 platforms. And then also, if anyone is interested in learning more about my work, if they have an organization that they want to refer me, or if they work like their organization themselves, who want to bring in speaking, training, or subject matter expertise, please reach out to me on my website at rahmehramezany.com. No dashes, no periods, no anything. And you can find out about me and my different services, especially right now. We are a little bit of a month and a half away from the start of Ramadan. So I'm doing a really big push to educate people for free and paid services around Muslim inclusion so that organizations can have their most inclusive Ramadan yet.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming and hanging out with me. This has been a blast. We got to do it.
Thank you.
We'll do it again, because
that would be cool.
we could have talked for like 3
We could have talked about it. So much.
But thank you again so much. Thanks everybody for listening and tuning in and hanging out with us. Love you guys.
Thanks
and
all.
See you later.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Conscious Environment Podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening to that as much as I enjoyed recording it for you. And thank you again to Rahmeh for coming through and hanging out with me, answering a bunch of questions about DEI stuff. And hopefully you learned a little something by listening to us. If you want to support the show financially, you can absolutely do so. There are Venmo and Cashapp links down below, as well as a bonfire link, which is a link to our merch site. So head over there if you want to get a little bit more bang for your buck. We have a couple of shirts that you can go and pick up or share with somebody. If you can't support the show financially, I absolutely understand that as well. But if you could please just on Spotify or Apple download the show, and that doesn't cost you anything. And also leave a 5-star review if you can, or tell your friends about the show. Tell your mom; it's probably going to be your favorite show. And do me one last favor. Remember, I love you, and go drink water. Like right now. Go drink water right now. Okay, I'll see you next week.